Hey everybody, thank you for tuning in. This is the 4th episode of Stepping from Stone to Stone, a podcast discussing combat Silat, also known as Penjak Silat per Temperon. We are discussing the attributes, principles, strategies, and some of the underlying concepts behind all combat, as well as PSP in specific. With me is Guru Sean Stark, founder and creator of PSP, and I'm your host, self-described regular guy, Aaron Chappell. Hey Guru, how are you doing today?
Good.
Now that I've stumbled all over our intro.
Yeah, you beat it up pretty good.
Yeah. Well,
Take no prisoners.
Yeah, it's the 4th episode. The honeymoon is over. So
yeah, we're not reshooting just for that, or refilming, recapturing, whatever.
Longtime listeners may have noted last episode I didn't mention a next time we'll talk about, which is something I should probably do at the end of every episode because I have ADD and you have a life outside of this podcast. But in an offline conversation, we had kind of talked about discussing our definition of attributes as well as principles and concepts. So, what is the elevator pitch for attributes? What, in a succinct term, how do we define them in PSP?
So, well, as you know, we just talked about these. I think there are attributes that every person intrinsically has or does not have, such as, speed, height, reach, whatever. Physical attributes. There's spatial attributes, such as, we're in a bar, where it's crowded, all those kinds of things. So, environmental attributes are not always attributes. Most of the time what we're really concerned about is, hey, there's a patch of gravel over there, or I'm looking into the sun as this guy is trying to thump me. So, but environmental attributes are things we can use around us to improve our situations, or at least things that we need to be aware of. And then, of course, there's probably another couple as well of categories, but then the primary one, I think that we've sort of we talk about a lot in martial arts is attributes that we develop. So I would say combative attributes, and so that's kind of where I'm hanging my hat on. That is, attributes are the building blocks for skills and techniques that we build as a regular course of training.
So we're more or less breaking those into 3 blocks. Then we have our trainable attributes, things that we can affect, our untrainable attributes, which are genetics, and then our environmental attributes, where we are, and kind of using that to start providing context for anything that might happen. Is that
that's fair. Lines? Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, and then of course, all of those same things apply to any attacker or multiple attackers or whatever. So,
well, just whatever the situation happens to be.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we don't get too much say in that.
No, that's sort of the suck of the deal.
Being an adult sometimes sucks.
Yeah.
So, and for those of us, or those listeners who are coming from the combatives community, what we're calling spatial awareness or environmental attributes, probably also commonly referred to as situational awareness for you guys.
Yeah, that's
What was that?
I said, yeah, that's another version of it.
Yeah. Just to give people a little bit of a touchstone or a different term of art that they might be more familiar with. So, obviously focusing more on the attributes that we can affect, because that's going to direct and inform our training. What are some of those, and how do we train those?
Well, we work a lot on building relationship. To me, that is an attribute, but the attribute is not. How would I say that? To me, the attribute is learning how to be attentive to your position in relationship to another person. So it's an awareness development, but it could happen via touch. It can happen via visualization, whatever, visualizing. But it's that combination of things that tells you where you're at, and that's a attribute or a skill that we can develop through our evasions, through our entries, and then basically throughout the rest of the material we're just reapplying that over and over. And then another one we can clearly develop is being non-telegraphic. So for us, that's I think that's pretty hugely important for most people. It is awesome when you fight somebody who tells you what they're going to do before they do it.
May all my fights be such fights.
And it's a hell of a thing when you fight somebody that doesn't give you any warning. So we work on that through those same our entries and our evasions, but we do that through the specific use of explosive footwork, but not strictly that. We also use set points, which it's basically a recognition process of understanding where you're at in relationship to an opponent, and wherever you recover to is then a set point. And then angulation, because most of the time by finding the proper angle you shorten the distance to your target, which time and speed are all relational. So if your angle and everything is set up well, and you're explosive, and you're, as a result, non-telegraphic, it all works together. There's an attribute, just in developing body culture or physical awareness of yourself, figuring out what your ranges are. For example, if most of the people that I have trained over the years, and I have done it myself, when striking with the elbow, they kind of generically consider anything within 6 inches of the tip of their elbow as being an elbow strike. But when you really want to make the most impact, pun intended, with the use of an elbow, then you want to focus on the tip, and that has to do mostly with learning how to range out, learning how to adjust your body so that you can perform a strike that has the most impact. And so we do that. Usually that's not as much of a fixed development process. That's more like hey, you just did the elbow entry, but didn't really do it. Maybe drop your shoulder back. And that's more of a discussion that takes place, but it takes place from teacher to student. And then physical awareness of somebody else, kind of the same thing. Spatial awareness, all those things take place based off of our meta movements, our evasions, entries, how to check somebody, all of that. And that's kind of the attribute development in becoming situationally aware. It's recognizing that I'm in a position where this guy is going to throw another punch. In fact, it's that recognition that says, hey, when this hand goes back to where it started from, this other hand is probably going to come out. And that's based on, the process of continuously engaging with people who want to hit you. And so, you can learn a lot of these things through process as much as any particular drill or something, you know what I mean? Adaptability, strength, stamina, flexibility, rooting, all these things are things that we work on continuously. But we have other, a little more obscure things like community, understanding how to relate to other people in your class, understanding the imminent signs of violence, and all of those things are attributes that we developed through PSP through its studies. So, and there's a ton more, fluidity, timing ratios, just general readiness, being able to be adaptable, self-offense, stuff like that.
Yeah, the reason I chuckled on that is self-offense has become a bit of a term of art in PSP. For those that have experienced it, when I say that we're not a very defensive or we're not the type of art as a general body to wait for the opponent to come to us, that may be a bit of an understatement. So like I said, that's almost become a running joke.
Yeah.
I'm not defending. I'm changing who the victim is early on in this encounter.
Yeah, as early as possible, right? I mean, yeah. you might start the process, but it is my intent to finish it.
Yeah.
And obviously finish it in my favor.
And of course, if any lawyers or anybody like that are listening, obviously this is responding to illegitimate self-defense cases.
Of course.
So that's a little bit interesting to me, just kind of taking the large overview, more or less what we're looking to do with a student that comes into PSP is first build their ability to recognize their context, and then through the when I say recognize context, I also mean recognize relationship and things of that nature. And then through the non-telegraphic footwork, through understanding how to recognize relationship in others, we're seeking to deny an opponent that same recognition, or even be misleading when we start getting into some of the baiting material.
Yeah, absolutely.
Throwing the wrong cues.
Yeah. When you start to, that's one of the areas where I just had this conversation with one of our guys last night offline. The question essentially came across to me as, why CLOT? And, my answer, of course, is it doesn't have to be CLOT, but CLOT is the thing that gave me my epiphany on fighting. It's a continuous thing. I continue to have moments of insight and learning and stuff, and I, at this point, could get them from anything, I think. But so it's kind of a acknowledgement of that, but also because I think that there's some pretty significant methodologies in Penchak-Silat for misleading. Hand movement relates to eye tracking, and there is a lot of hand movement that goes into good Silat that is distracting to an attacker's eye. And I don't focus a lot on that, but that does exist well within Silat specifically.
Well, and I've seen kind of a more subtle shift, rather than being blatant about it. It's subtle weight shifts and subtle misdirecting cues where you're not necessarily looking to have that huge movement of, hey, look at my hands. It's you're already keyed up enough to be watching everything that I do, trying to get a little bit of an edge. I'm just going to shift my weight a little bit and hopefully throw your ideas about how this is going to go off.
Yeah, you can do that quite a bit. One of the things I enjoy doing to people is
beating them.
Yes, of course. Closing the space in such a way that it's not apparent. And that's one of those, like, you can do that through angling, and you can do that through the body postures and subtle weight shifts that you were talking about, where you're just by a changing of the upper body's position, you can give the appearance of being further away than you actually are. And those things are fantastic for getting the offensive entry. Anyway, there's all manner of ways to do it.
Yeah, and I've kind of enjoyed a little bit of the the same concept, but at the opposite end of the range spectrum, where I'm already entered, but through hip shifting and doing things with my center of balance, I'm able to hit people with tools like a shin kick, to their outer thigh, that they would swear, I was in knee and elbow only range. And this comes in there, and they're like, I didn't even expect that. It hurts terribly, So
yeah, and you can standing right alongside somebody, you can very effectively deliver a tip of the knee strike where most people are going to hit with their thigh.
Yep.
Just by dropping your hip out a little bit and rotating your body a little bit, and little subtle things like that. And those are the kinds of attributes that you develop, in PSP in part. But to me, it's more about that understanding of the relationship dynamic, and when you fully understand your own body culture, then a lot of that stuff you just have to have somebody point out. And so that's where having a good teacher, but a teacher who also has some of that own process going on is pretty critical. But because there's no way you can talk about it, but if you formalize every conceivable thing, then the curriculum becomes a bloated shit fest, and then you have distraction more than you have anything else.
No offense to any other bloated shit fest that might be out there, of course.
Yeah. Or maybe.
Yeah, we're going to get letters on that.
If you said it last time, I think. If you haven't offended at least 3 or 4, then you haven't done a good job.
Well, and I think I said last time that if anybody was offended, that you were the one to contact, definitely not.
Yeah.
And I meant that from the bottom of my heart, and I'll say it again. Your Stark's email is on the website, not mine.
Yeah.
And I think that touches into principles and concepts. We talked about a little bit about what attributes are, and rather than just turning this into a brainstorming of listing off every conceivable attribute, which would take who knows how long.
Yeah, take a long time.
By utilizing principles and concepts, we can kind of build with those early recognition attributes and have somebody use that to get adaptability.
Yeah. Yeah, well, okay, so, a principle for me, the notion of a principle is that it is applicable, I want to use the word principle again. It is something that is applicable in many different scenarios. For example, leverage, the idea of leverage exists as a principle within CLOT generally. But you can have pretty specific principles. For example, a principle of an arm bar, you can apply to a leg, you can apply to an elbow using your leg, you can apply to an arm using your head. It doesn't really matter the process, the specific process that you use, as much as are you, representing the leverage that's needed to apply the arm bar, which, or a leg bar or whatever, and back break, those all those things sort of all are the same principle to me. And where that differentiates from concepts is sort of like, well, here's this ethereal idea.
Are you there?
Yep, That's it. That's the end.
Oh, okay.
To me, it's concepts are kind of a cop-out when you use it as a term without any structure, without any follow-through, because concepts are, oh, well, here's an idea. And the idea needs to follow through, and it needs to be based off of principles, and it needs to be based off of attribute development, which lead to technique. So having just concepts is foolish. So
So give me an example of a concept in PSP, and then how we would implement that concept and thereby make it useful with our principles and attributes.
Okay, let me think about that for a second, because I never use the term because I find it a little evasive and not very useful. I kind of try to be nuts and bolts on stuff, but so a concept might be okay, here's a concept. Time and space are related, right?
Yeah.
That's a concept. As a principle, then what I need to do is to take that concept and give it some form. How would you demonstrate then this concept? I would demonstrate this concept by saying a bullet traveling at 1,000, feet a second over the course of 10 seconds is going to cover 10,000 feet. And that's a 10-second delay. So time and space are equatable. So if I then am striking from farther away and trying to hit somebody, then obviously they have more time then to respond, even though I can be moving very fast. They're just a related topic. So the goal for us then is to figure out how to put ourselves in position so that we have a relationship, A, that doesn't allow them to recognize that an attack has started, and B, puts it on the shortest trajectory as possible. Obviously, that whole purpose then is to ensure greater success, right? Because the best strike in the world is only based off of one thing. First, you got to hit the damn thing, whatever it is. Everything else is secondary. If you don't hit it, it doesn't matter how much power you had. It doesn't matter how fast you thought you were. It doesn't matter if it was a fight-ending blow if you missed the target. It doesn't matter. So you got to hit the target. So those are that would be my trail from concept to principle to application.
Well, and that appreciation of the nuts and bolts and really the focusing on the nuts and bolts reminds me, and you're talking about the most important strike is the one that hits. It's not, I remember old discussions on the PSP forums and a comment that you had made at one of the Keloargos, which is kind of our system-wide gathering that happens once every other decade or so.
Yeah. But, it was a yearly thing that we transmuted that into a every decade thing.
It's that stupid real life that just keeps on getting in the way of all the other things I'd like to do with my time.
Yeah.
But I remember you mentioning that sticks were for smacking. And in the Southeast Asian arts and in a lot of the other Indonesian arts that I've been exposed to, there's a lot that you can do with a stick. It's grappling, it's 37 different strikes from 15 different parts of the stick, and there's locking, there's strangles, all this cool stuff. And you're like, no, this is for hitting somebody with, and now we're just going to do that and simplify it, and it kind of pierces through a lot of the esoteric stuff and the system bloat that starts to grow up around older systems. It's not, there's nothing mystical about smacking somebody with a stick, and you don't get that aha demo moment where it's, oh, that was so smooth, it didn't even look like he worked at all to strip that stick out of that guy's hand. You just get, I'm teeing up on this guy's skull.
So here's another concept to principle to attribute, right? Concept is whatever you do with a knife you can do with your empty hand, or whatever you do with your empty hand you can do with a weapon, right? Mm-hmm. Now people say that, but how many systems have you been in that do that? Well, in many of the Southeast Asian, there is a lot of direct carryover. Now, I've had this discussion with a few people because they're like, well, you can't really do what you do with empty hand with a weapon. And I say, well, I think it kind of depends on what your viewpoint is, because from my perspective, if you're strictly looking at the form of how the empty hand moves versus the form of how the hand holding a weapon moves, yeah, true, you can't. But if you look at it in terms of leverage and outcome and those kinds of aspects, then suddenly the weapon is a lot like empty hand. I can do a destruction of Totok on your hand with my fist, and I can cut it with a knife. Are they the same? No. Do they accomplish the same things? Hopefully not. Hopefully your freaking knife hurt them more.
If it doesn't, maybe you should revisit a lot of things.
Yeah. So, generally speaking, the point of leverage is the same. I'm using my greatest point of leverage at their vulnerable extension or whatever, so it depends on what exactly you're doing. But the premise is still the identical process. Now, I just posted that video from showing stick not too long ago in how it relates to our empty hand entry, our Garrock specifically. And I showed it as a destruction. I showed it as an entry. I showed it as a takedown. I showed it as a strangle. And I didn't have time to show all the empty hand alongside of it. But, the purpose for me was to show that, to get the guys that I was working with to see the connection between it, and to also show that, I have to adapt according to the leverage of the tool. But the intent is still the same outcome, and my movements are generally the same. Not exactly the same, but generally the same, and I just adapt them accordingly. And so, that to me is a principle or a concept to principle, and then the attribute development is when we're actually just practicing those drills over and over, trying to get those formations and those adjustments kind of embedded in our nugget, and get it sorted out. Where, to me, Kali or Arnis, Eskrima, all those systems have done exactly that when they show joint locking and they show strangles and takedowns and all those kinds of things, and CLAT systems. But it unnecessarily, It unnecessarily shows more than you need to, and I think what ends up happening is that I think that probably the original intent was to show how this could happen, and then it became no, do this now, and you do this, right? I could not, for the life of me, hey, if this is you and you're doing this and you're enjoying it, keep doing it, whatever, it's up to you. For me, I cannot for the life of me imagine meeting somebody with a bolo in my hand or a golok in my hand or big ass machete, however you want to say it, and they also have one, and me thinking, I'm going to joint lock this guy. Why in the hell would you do that? I have no clue why you would do that. Now, I could see totally trying to chop their arm off. I could see, putting them in a position where you chop their head off, which we would do through what we call our pukul pambas. Those are aspects where our empty hand, again, still translate into weapons. I probably am not going to do a strangle, although when we use weapons, we have weapons that have particular leverages, right? So you use a sarong, the best thing you can do with a sarong is not smack the guy. I promise you that's not going to work as well as you think it's going to work. Unless it's wet or full of stones or something like that, use it for what it's best at being used for, which is obviously going to be a wrap-up, strangle somebody. Why mess around with anything else? Use the best components of a leverage of a tool for its expression, instead of trying to make it a bigger piece of curriculum than it needs to be. I think there's some cool stuff out there. I mean, you can do some really interesting, intricate things, but do you really need to do those is a whole other conversation.
Well, that touches on a couple of things to me. You know, as I came into PSP when I was 16, I want to say. Somewhere around there. I'm no longer 16, and I have other demands on my time besides studying martial arts all day. So, you know, being able to have those gross motor skills translate across a broad variety of categories with a few adjustments, you know, minute adjustments.
Yeah.
You know, my arm is going to move the same way my arm and shoulder is going to move the same way if I have a Golic or if I have an empty hand. It's just I'm going to do slightly different stuff with my hands and maybe change the range a little bit. But, you know, that speaks to a little bit of efficiency in training because I'm not a career martial artist. I don't do this for a living. I have a day job. I have a woman who cares very much about me and occasionally wants quality time where it's just me and her, and I'm not talking about hitting people or things or anything. So, you know, it's nice to, it's shocking. But it's nice to have that efficiency in there. And then, you know, when you were mentioning how systems bloat, you and I have talked off air a little bit about, you know, in PSP, you can go over the core body of curriculum in about, 2.5, 3 days, probably? If you did 8-hour days and had a...
Well, I mean, honestly, to go like from start to finish and do it well enough, I used to do it in a week. I think a week is probably still a decent representation.
Well, and I'm just talking overview, not instilling the skill in the student or whatever. Just, you know, hey, you're going to see everything at least once. Yeah,
that would be... Yeah, you could do the majority of it in 3 days, probably.
Yeah. Well, I know we ran out of time in 2 days, but I think we got up to stream 5, so there was 3 left. Figure a day for the other 3 streams and questions. And then trying to convince everybody that you really didn't hate them and that you wanted to come to them.
Yeah, I mean, and even then, you know, there was still repetitious training in there. So, I mean, I could run through it in a day because, in fact, the last video series was filmed in a day. So, actually, it's completely doable.
Well, and looking at that though, when you have an art that has that brevity, and there's not a bunch of variations to, there's infinite variation, but there's not a bunch of variations that are codified. They're not part of the main art. That doesn't keep students coming back over a period of years. It's not a way to build a base, and it's kind of a crappy business model. Yeah. You know, I was talking to a couple of the guys in the training group here last week, and I said, you know, in about a year and a half, there probably won't be a lot of new concepts and principles that you guys are introduced to. You'll be able to relate most of this stuff to something you've seen before.
Yeah.
After that, it'll just be instilling and, you know, deepening your knowledge instead of trying to constantly broaden it.
Yeah, I used to say to people in my class all the time, I'd be like, hey, you know, in a year, you're going to have all the material I have pretty much as far as, you know, upright fighting or whatever. I think that's probably not exactly accurate, but yeah, 1.5 to 2 years for sure. And the only reason that I'm going to be better at it is because I'm going to see it faster. I'm going to see the relationships faster than you. I'm going to see the connections, and then I'm still going to have that other stuff that you haven't learned yet.
But you mean that for your old age?
Generally speaking, it's all, you know, becomes about recognition, and the reason that's a value to me, that's one of those attribute development components, right, is, you know, you have so much more time to put in depth of training versus continuous learning about new things, that you're just continuously learning about the same things deeper and deeper, which is, to me, an attribute that shows up especially under stress.
Seems reasonable to me.
Yeah. I mean, in theory, right? Conceptually.
Well, I mean, also getting smacked by people who have learned under that learning protocol, it seems reasonable.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, and what I was about to say is that's a commonality from what I've seen in any art that has combative practitioners. Eventually you give up on attempting to address everything because you know you can't.
Yeah.
And then past that, you look at it and you go, okay, well, how can I teach people to figure it out on their own, on the fly, in situations that I have no idea what they're going to be facing or who their next fight is against. I'm not going to do their fighting or their dying for them, so it's kind of important to them. But, that brevity of technique and focusing on the development of attributes and the understanding of principles, or the application of principles, I should say.
Well, to me, there's a couple of things that you indirectly have neared in that statement, which is, one of the ways that I look at PSP as being personal is that I don't fill out every detail. I fill out the details that I know are necessary to keep you on a path. And your exploration has got to be your exploration, because I'm not going to be there for you. Your fight, you are. And if you don't care enough to explore it, then cool, that's you. It's not a reflection of the art, it's a reflection of you. And it allows people then a room to take ownership of their study. The concept is, I just had to say it, the concept is you find your own space through the study of all these attributes. And then you develop the things that you are strongest at developing. Now, how that plays out as an attribute is, we know, as in you and I, know that particular people in PSP have found their sort of niche areas, Pengajar Bill using more the Monyet Harmau components, and myself, I'm really just a blaster. I don't care too much. I don't worry too much about weapons as such, other than that I need to be continuously fluent enough at them to teach them. And then you were a big proponent of weapons use. So to me, that's the kind of beauty of PSP in a nutshell. Is you are not only allowed, you're expected to find those spaces for yourself, and still find it based on the same materials, which is pretty cool. And I think that you generally, people have you just have more freedom, because not so much of it is spelled out, so you get to find some things for yourselves. And when you do that, I feel like you as individuals get a little more of that ownership, but ownership always yields fruit.
Well, and there's a huge, in my experience at least, there's a huge benefit to, you're requiring personal responsibility and initiative out of a student. It's not suggested, it's required.
Yeah, literally cannot become a guru without it.
Yeah. Well, and you really can't advance, I would say, even past level 1 in the system, because even if you mentally understand what this is, and you can regurgitate all the cool Bahasa names for all the techniques, but if you don't own them enough to apply them for yourself personally,
Yeah.
That's going to come out of the testing, and it's not going to be a comfortable situation for anybody. And, words will be exchanged.
Yeah.
It's not trying to be a dick about it. It's just, you either have skill or you don't.
Yeah.
And that personalization has enabled me down here in the training group to make this a relevant conversation and message for the guy that we have that's a reserve police department deputy, and the two ladies that we have that just started out with no martial background, and the guys that are working in door and bouncing, all in the same class.
Yeah.
That's not... I thought it would be much easier when I was looking at everybody else do it.
Yeah, no, it's funny because when you have a group like that, you have, oh, this person has never kicked or punched or did really anything before, and then you have the guy who knows already what they know, but they don't know it in your context or the context you're sharing. And so you're changing context and teaching context, and teaching tools and whatever, attribute development, all that stuff all at the same time. Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah, the way to illustrate that for us recently was we were working some slaps off of the Alice, and keeping a loose, relaxed structure for power generation.
Yeah.
And some of our newer students were like, "Oh man, these slaps actually work." And some of the guys who had a different background, details withheld to protect the guilty, went, "Yep, there's like two people walking around that I'm pretty sure are deaf because slaps work."
Yeah. Wait, and that component is interesting because, so this is to me is an example of where concept and attribute meet technique again, right? Because I don't define how you use your hand in the hand entries, for example. If you want to make a fist, make a fist. If you want to make it be a horizontal or a vertical or a, boar's tooth or whatever, you can do a palm slap. I don't really give a crap as long as you understand what your target is. Don't try to finger jab the ribs. I mean, you can do that if you're like a Hulk-kun guy who's, been striking watermelons with your fingertips, but a fist is so much nicer. So I think those little areas like that, is where personalization and concept and attribute come together,
Oh, and that's the study of where that overlaps is, part of that aha magic in PSP. We don't get it from cool demos or being able to do sleight of hand or work with an unresisting opponent. It's hey, this is super personal, and the short girl's making it work as much as the tall guy.
Yeah.
So it's been nice for me over the last however many years.
Right.
So, well, we rambled a little bit more than I intended to. What's next?
And here we didn't think it would be enough.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was saying 3 episodes for this, and you said we could bang it out in 1. So hopefully everybody stayed with us. What's next on the agenda?
I think that's a really good question. I have a list of things that I sent you, but I don't know where we're at with it.
So let's see here. I'm going to pull up that list.
I mean, we had talked about learning methodologies and stuff like that.
Do we? Yeah, I think learning and teaching would be a good one for next time.
Yeah.
I had to look with a fairly critical eye at when you brought that up. The subject of that about how I've changed as a student, and I like to think that I've made most of the major mistakes. So I'm not guessing if they're bad to make or not.
And my story, and I've done my own fair share of that. So the best thing is coming out on the other side.
Yes. And being
you
able,
never come out, that's unfortunate.
well, and you get to look at it from the rear view mirror, and that's the best view I've seen of where I used to be.
Yeah, exactly.
So, all right. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in. If you want to find out more about PSP, you can get on YouTube and look up Sealot Junkie 1, or go to combat-sealot.net, or go to sealot.us, and Sealot is spelled way different than it's pronounced. It's S-I-L-A-T. So thanks for tuning in. Guru, did you have any closing remarks?
No, thanks for everybody for listening.
All right.